Welcome to the inaugural Singapore Maritime Lecture. While we await the arrival of today's speaker, Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew, we would like to invite you to take your seats if you haven't already and make yourselves comfortable. Before we begin, there are a few things we hope you could take note of this afternoon. Firstly, as a courtesy to all our guests and also to avoid interference with the sound system, we would like to remind you to kindly turn off your mobile phones and pages. So if we could all do that right now, it would be much appreciated. Okay, seems like everyone has done that. Okay, during the dialogue session, should you have a question for Minister Mentor, kindly step forward to the nearest microphone that you see around you in the ballroom and wait for the facilitator to acknowledge you before asking your question. Please give your name and the organization you are from before posing your question. Please speak clearly and precisely to ensure that your question is heard. And at the end of the event, we would like to request that you rise and remain where you are until Minister Mentor has taken his leave. And finally, if you are joining us for the Singapore International Maritime Awards Gala Dinner later this evening, please note, we have arranged for transport from here to Shangri-La Hotel. And the pickup location will be on your left after you exit the ballroom later. Should you wish to board to take our transport, kindly proceed to the pickup location immediately after the Singapore Maritime Lecture ends, and we will have ushers on hand to guide the way. All right, and that's all I have for you now. So let's wait. I will be up shortly. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker for today, Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the inaugural Singapore Maritime Lecture. Our facilitator this afternoon is Professor Kishore Mahbubani, Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Professor Mahbubani contributed 33 years to the Singapore Foreign Service. His distinguished service includes postings to Cambodia, Malaysia, Washington, D.C., and twice as Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations. During his time at the UN, he also served as President of the Security Council. He was the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 1993 to 1998 and was listed as one of the top 100 public intellectuals in the world by the Foreign Policy and Prospect magazine in 2005. Professor Mahbubani became the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in 2004. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Mahbubani to deliver the opening remarks and introduce our speaker for today. Professor, please.
Minister Mentor, ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this inaugural Singapore Maritime Lecture. Now, as you are here to listen to Minister Mentor Lee, let me just make three very brief introductory comments. First, let me begin by congratulating the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, MPA, on its 11th anniversary. I believe that the MPA is a rather unique institution that reflects well Singapore's pragmatic style of governance. It acts both as a regulator and as a promoter of Singapore's maritime industry, and has been successful in both dimensions. And this explains Singapore's extraordinarily privileged position in the maritime industry. Secondly, we should commend MPA for launching this lecture series. It has become a cliche to say that the world has changed and that it continues to change. And the maritime industry is not immune from having to respond to these changes. From terrorism to global warming, from bird flu to nuclear proliferation, there are many new global challenges that will directly or indirectly affect the maritime industry. And I hope that this lecture series that's been launched today will throw new light on these challenges. And since Singapore has benefited so much from the maritime industry, one small contribution that Singapore can make in return to the industry is to encourage a deeper dialogue on the larger and long-term challenges that it faces. Thirdly and finally, I have an obligation to introduce the speaker, even though in this case, the speaker literally needs no introduction. But for the sake of some of our overseas friends, please let me reiterate a few key features of Minister Mentor's distinguished career. Minister Mentor Lee, or MM as he's fondly referred to in Singapore, was born in Singapore on 16 September 1923. He read law in Cambridge University, England. He became Prime Minister of Singapore in 1959 at the age of 36 and served as Prime Minister for 31 years. After stepping down in 1990, he assumed the post of Senior Minister, and 3 years ago he became the Minister Mentor. Now, MM's achievements are far too many to mention. Probably his primary achievement is captured in the title of his second book, quote, The Transformation of Singapore from Third World to First. And indeed, if you pick up the book and you read the blurbs on the book, they capture accurately the current global recognition of MM as a leading international statesman. The former President George H.W. Bush described MM as one of the brightest, ablest men I've ever met. And I can add that when I was at a small private gathering of CEOs in St. Petersburg, Russia, a few years ago, spontaneously, without any prompting, the former President Bush said, "The man whom I respect the most is Minister Lee Kuan Yew." Margaret Thatcher said, and I quote, "In office, I read and analyzed every speech of Harry's. He had a way of penetrating the fog of propaganda and expressing with unique clarity the issues of our time and the way to tackle them. He was never wrong." Kofi Annan said, "The title of this book, From Third World to First, expresses an aspiration of all developing countries, but so far, alas, an achievement of very few. Singapore is one of those few." And Kofi Annan encouraged all to read the book, as do I. But today, we are even more privileged to hear the man in person reflect on the challenges facing the maritime industry, and it gives me great pleasure now to welcome Minister Mentor to deliver his address. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to speak to the maritime community at the inaugural Singapore Maritime Lecture. My first contact in politics was with the Tanjong Pagar port in Singapore when I became the legal advisor to the Port Workers Union, or the Singapore Harbour Board Workers Union, way back in the early 1950s. In my first election in 1955, I chose the Tanjong Pagar constituency because it was the home of a few thousand port workers. And I have since retained my links with the port workers and the development of the port ever since. A large cluster of maritime businesses and services have grown up around the port, contributing 7.5% to Singapore's GDP in 2005, employing 95,800 people, or 4% of total employment. Singapore's raison d'etre, when it started, was the port, and Singapore must strive to remain a major hub port. Global developments in sea transport can be seen through the growth and transformation of Singapore as a maritime center. The development of Maritime Singapore is about anticipating the future, adapting to change, creating and seizing opportunities, and the pursuit of excellence. When we decided in 1969 to build our first container terminal at Tanjong Pagar, Japan was the only other Asian country with a container terminal built to serve as a hub. Our container port was the first in Southeast Asia in 1972 at the start of the containerization wave, and has become the world's largest container transshipment hub today. From a labor-intensive industry, the port evolved into a knowledge hub employing cutting-edge IT systems, and has given Singapore first-mover advantage that continues to pay good dividends to the economy. Following the loss of Maersk and Evergreen in the year 2000 and 2002, our business model has adapted to meet the needs of shipping lines seeking to run their own terminals. Last October, Singapore was the first Asian port of call for MR Maersk, the world's largest container ship, demonstrating Singapore's readiness for the era of mega container ships. We are continuing our investments in new facilities and infrastructure to be in time for the future. Maritime Singapore is a hub port and much more. In the area of shipbuilding, since the opening of the shipyards at Sembawang and the Western Industrial Zone, Singapore has become a major shipbuilding and repair center. Our shipyards are now world leaders in rig construction and vessel conversions, forming the core of our burgeoning offshore and maritime sector. Since the opening of the first oil refinery in Pulau Bukom in 1961 by Shell, Singapore has become Asia's largest refining center with a multi-billion-dollar petrochemical hub in Jurong Island. The port supports the oil and petrochemical businesses, and it has in turn grown to become the world's busiest bunkering port. We have developed in tandem with Asia's economic growth and capitalized on the growth in the shipping activity in the East. Since the 1990s, we have developed Singapore as a one-stop center for maritime services. Our business environment has been successful in attracting maritime and related companies to capitalize on Singapore's strategic location and sound infrastructure, to plug into the growth of Asian shipping. Today, there are more than 5,000 companies in Singapore serving the international maritime community. The growth of the maritime sector will reflect the total global trends in world trade and economic activity. In the medium term, global trade is expected to grow, fueled largely by growth in Asia. The Chinese and Indian economies are expected to grow at 10 and 11 for China and 9 to 10 for India over the next 2 years, and at relatively high levels for the next few decades. The Japanese economy is recovering, and the ASEAN countries are pressing ahead with their vision of an ASEAN community by 2015. Asia will be a major engine of global economic growth and trade. There are some potential hindrances to trade in the background: strained US-China relations, protectionism in the West, and intensified concerns on maritime security and environmental protection are areas where excessive preventive actions may hurt the global world trading system. There's also the danger that unilateral measures on maritime and cargo security, such as the recent requirement that all US-bound containers be scanned in foreign ports by 2012, will slow down the flow of trade. A balance must be struck between ensuring security and facilitating trade if we are to preserve the efficiency of shipping and cargo operations and allow global trade to flourish. On global warming, the world needs global solutions to the challenges of climate change and sustainable development. These developments will affect shipping trends. We are witnessing the opening moves made by various countries over the Northwest and Northeastern Passage as a result of the melting of the polar ice caps over the Arctic. In the next few decades, shipping lines between the Pacific and the Atlantic may switch to these Arctic routes during the summer season. Many challenges to shipping today can be traced to the underlying dynamics between coastal states and the shipping nations. The international maritime community will have to balance the rights of the coastal states with those of other states in the freedom of navigation. We have to continuously manage these tensions within UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, and safeguard against any measures that will impede the freedom of navigation for international shipping. With the shift of the economic and maritime center of gravity to Asia, Asian countries have the opportunity and an increasing interest in assuming a bigger role in global maritime affairs at international forums. Asia will have to safeguard its maritime interests and ensure that they are accommodated in the ongoing Western-driven development of a global framework of rules and standards governing international shipping. Because of its diverse maritime constituencies, its location at the crossroads of major trade routes, and its status as both a major port and a flag state, Singapore has always sought to provide a balanced perspective to such deliberations. The efficiency of seaborne trade contributes to the world's economic growth. With the growth of manufacturing in Asia, the shipping business in Asia will grow. We can expect more Asian voices to enrich the deliberations at international forums to tackle issues that cannot be solved unilaterally or regionally. The recent decision to establish a permanent secretariat for the Asian Ship Owners Forum in Singapore will promote and facilitate greater consultation on maritime affairs. To ensure that the measures introduced are sensible and pragmatic, a multilateral approach is more likely to produce sensible and pragmatic solutions than uncoordinated unilateral initiatives. Going forward, Maritime Singapore will have to go beyond its status as a major hub port to become an international maritime center providing a full suite of services. To compete effectively, we have to become a complete maritime cluster by adding to our core group of ship owners and operators maritime support services such as maritime finance, insurance, and legal services. The launch of the Maritime Finance Incentive Scheme in 2006 to attract shipping assets under a range of financing options, and SGX Asia Clear to help companies hedge freight risks through derivative tools are just two of our latest initiatives to meet the needs of the maritime community. Singapore will live up to its reputation for stable, pro-business policies that provide certainty. We avoid backtracking or U-turns. we set out to make companies feel welcome and valued as part of Singapore's maritime ecosystem. We have sought to foster the interaction and networking that is critical to the success of any business enterprise. Through forums such as this, new developments like the integrated resorts and F1 on the social and entertainment front will add vibrancy to the city, making Singapore, we hope, a great place to work and live in. With China and India leading the Asian Renaissance, Singapore offers companies a central location to plug into the growth of Asia and Asian shipping. The presence of a comprehensive suite of maritime ancillary services and our extensive air connectivity makes Singapore a convenient base for operations for the Asian market. It is our value proposition to the maritime community. We have competitive pressures from other aspiring maritime centers and must continually better our business propositions or risk becoming overtaken. Singapore's growth as a maritime hub is tied to the fortunes of maritime businesses in Singapore, our strategic partners. We will maintain our close ties with our partners and create the conditions for continued growth in the future, always on the lookout for enhancement to our business environment to offer the best value proposition. We are committed to working together with the business community to seek opportunities for growth and challenges. We will grow Singapore's maritime ecosystem, a one-stop center encompassing a world-class port and a comprehensive suite of shipping and maritime services at the heart of our economy. We are attracting able students, both Singaporean and foreign, to be educated and trained in Singapore to service this maritime industry and to fill the growing numbers of exciting and rewarding jobs. We will also invest in maritime R&D to help companies safeguard their longer-term competitiveness. Shipping will play an ever bigger role in the economic well-being of countries as trade expands. With the rise of India and China as two huge manufacturing bases, Asians will be major players in maritime activities. We have an increasing stake in ensuring that shipping remains the most secure, efficient, and environmentally friendly mode of transport. And the world's maritime nations will need centers in Asia known for integrity, quality, and neutrality to enable them to plug into Asia's growth. Singapore hopes to be one such center. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Mentor. Thank you, Minister Mentor. May we invite you to take your seat on stage, please? And also for Professor Mahbubani to join us on stage and to facilitate the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, MM. While MM is being mic'd, can I just tell you the rules of the game? Which is that there are mics in front of you. We would appreciate it if you could start thinking of your questions. When you come forward, please identify yourself if possible. Give us your designation. And then, if possible, do give us a short and sharp question, and we will try to reserve statements for some other occasions. So with that, MM, if you don't mind, if I may ask the first question. After living in the US for several years, I learned that the horror scenario they're worried about is of a nuclear bomb appearing in a container, creates a wild scare, all the ports get frozen, trades get stalled. In your speech, you said that we must react with the balance of both considerations. How would you address a frightened American audience?
Well, the Americans are proposing that the containers be scanned and cleared at the last port of call, which will prove an immense burden on whichever port is the last port of call. We are counter-proposing, and are in discussions with them, to have the responsibility shared right along the line, so that the burden is not always on the last port of call. It's a highly technical business of how to detect fissile material, and I think the solution can be found. we will not unduly delay the flow of containers.
Thank you. Now, can I invite you, please, to come to the mic to pose the question? I will skip the first question and go to the second one. You are, please, please go to the mic if you don't mind. Yes.
Andreas Soman Pao from BW Shipping. Minister Mentor, in choosing between Singapore as one of the top global cities and the challenge of rising costs, how do you view these two opposing forces? Thank you.
Well, we have to keep our costs below those who are in a similar position as we are, so that we remain competitive. I think we should be able to manage that, because if you look at the office rentals, labor costs, costs of transportation, etc., we're still competitive against London, New York, Tokyo, or Hong Kong. So I believe we've got to watch it closely, make sure that it doesn't run away and get us into an uncompetitive position. There's a housing shortage at the moment, both for commercial and residential, as a result of the sudden influx of bankers and other high-end executives. But I think we can sort that out in 2 to 3 years. In the meantime, we have put into our planning some release of buildings from one use to another in order to loosen up the market. We'll cope.
Yeah. There's one question at the back there and then one in front here. Please go ahead. Yes, sir. Stand up, please, and come to the mic.
My name is Torger Reeve. I'm a Bill Wilhelmsen Professor of Shipping at BI, Norwegian School of Management. I'm also part of the NPA Advisory Board, R&D Advisory Board. And when we're discussing the maritime industry here, and I read the government policy documents, they all talk about high-tech industries like biotech, life sciences, digital media. What is the priority?
We are placing our bets at both ends of the spectrum. As I've said at the beginning, I belong to that generation that saw the raison d'etre for Singapore's being as the port. And the port used to be the Singapore River, which is at the mouth of this building. In 1819, this is where the ships came up the river, loaded and unloaded the goods. Then it moved to Tanjong Pagar as steamships came with the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. And now we've got containers all up, right up along Pasir Panjang, up to the west coast. Yes, there are other areas of growth. We have become an aviation hub. And just before this conference, I was comparing the contribution between Changi Airport and the aviation services and industries as against Tanjong Pagar and the Maritime cluster, and I think they're about equal. But I am a strong believer in the Maritime hub because you can relocate an aviation hub. You will find it difficult to relocate a Maritime hub. There are certain natural advantages that brought the British East India Company here as at the lowest tip of the point between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. And yes, you can have the Northeast Passage and the Northwest Passage open, but I think between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, this is the shipping arcade, and we're going to keep it that way. But we have young men and women educated abroad who are caught up in the excitement of the discovery of the genetic code, DNA of the human being, and they have convinced the government that we should put a bet on it. And we won't know whether the bet will come off for another 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But we have enough resources to place some bets on it. But this maritime industry is basic.
One question over here, and then one question at this table here. Please proceed. Mike's behind you.
Mr. Minister Mentor, my name is Philip Emberikos. I'm Greek, and I don't know whether I should address you as President of BIMCO or as advisory member of the Panama Canal. Now, I'm sorry about this, but my question basically refers to some of the work I've been doing, and it refers, you have very rightly pointed that sort of the emergence of Singapore as a maritime cluster, and the same applies for Greece and the same applies for Panama, is a very important mission, a very important goal, because that's how the trade is going to grow. And it's going to grow in those places where those clusters exist. It is my belief that the best way to achieve that is to attract the youth, and therefore we have to project a better or a more positive image of shipping into the youth. And I want to give you a little booklet that I wrote for the Panamanians youth when there was the issue of the Panama Canal referendum. And I hope, if you want, that BIMCO, which is the largest shipping organization who has supported me in those projects, would help Singapore and write something similar for the youth to also create another maritime clusters. So if I can present you this booklet. By the way, it's in Chinese.
Thank you.
What you think about the image of projection
Okay.
to children and
Okay. Thank you. I don't know if you want to comment on
Thank
youth
you.
in the maritime industry.
Do you read Chinese? Then you've handed me something you don't know the content of. Are you sure the translator has put your thoughts accurately into Chinese?
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
I take your point. I think there must be a sufficient flow of talent, of able and bright, energetic people into the industry, so that you have at the leading edge minds which are active, reaches out to the latest information and can adapt and adjust to the market. It's not as glamorous and sexy as the new biotech and pharmaceuticals and all these new discoveries, but as I've said at the beginning, I am of that generation that believes in the basics in life. Singapore exists not because we are a glitzy, glamorous place, but because the place works. Because it's got security, it's got efficiency, it's got honest, able government. I believe in basics, and the rest will look after itself. And this harbor and this maritime cluster is the basic. So there must be enough talent dedicated to this, to the continuation of this industry. I will get this. Might be easier if you send me the Greek or the English version. Sorry?
Spanish from Panamanian.
Well, Spanish. Well, we haven't got a Spanish to English translator, but we'll make do with the Chinese to English.
There's a question over here, one at the back, then and third one here now. The three in line, please.
Wilhelm Wilhelmsen from my own company in Norway. Minister Mentor, I don't think we should let this opportunity go by without talking a little bit about the environment. And my question to you is about how can Singapore be a spearhead in promoting a cleaner world for the maritime industries? We know that the shipping industry is a major pollutant. There still is a very efficient mode of transportation. But we need a spearhead in Asia, and I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit to that subject as to how can Singapore help us get a cleaner world.
Well, I have not devoted much effort to understanding how we can improve on it, but I'm told that one of the key reasons for the pollutants is the quality of the fuel that the ships burn, and it's a question of cost. A high sulfur content, bunkering oil,